who would like to start and share their perspective on current state or role of data in 2024 with regards to dealerships?
What we have seen over the last year, and I think that is, certainly evidenced by what was on display at NADA this couple of weeks ago, is this fact I think that dealers are understanding the value that they are sitting on relative to their first party data. But I think they're also starting to have sort of an aha moment from two perspectives. Number one, there are a lot of solutions out on the market that can help them not only extract more value from their first party data, but also working with a number of brands, a tool for one in the work that he's doing. There are opportunities to activate that data through these powerful MarTech engines as well. I think the other thing that is really coming to light more and more is there's a risk piece of this as well. I think more and more, particularly with some of the things that are under debate right now with the FTC relative to consumer data and dealers, the recently new safeguard rules under Graham Leach Bliley, there's also a risk piece of this, a risk mitigation factor of this. And I think those three things are coming together to sort of help dealers understand that this is an inflection point for their businesses when it comes to digital retailing. Now, I also say that I also believe that there's a lot of confusion out there, whether you're looking at data, whether you're looking at these technologies, and that's simply a byproduct, I think, of a lot of investment in this space, a lot of various companies saying that they can do one thing or another, and there are some very powerful brands in this space. And so part of this, I think, is also being sort of overwhelmed by all of the opportunities they have to impact their business.
From my perspective, there's a couple of key points regarding data, first-party data. Number one is kind of where it is created. I think the typical assumption is my first-party data is what's in my DMS, what's in my CRM. But the data that's actually first-party is really any interaction that the consumer or the shopper has with the brand. So that could be activity that's occurring on the website. It could be all the interactions within the store. It could be both hard data, which is like actually information stored in the database, as well as soft data, which is like all these interactions and events. We call them events in terms of every step you perform and interact with. So that could be, I'm on the website, I'm chatting, and those back and forth chats, the actual things I say as a shopper and the things that are responded to by the dealer are all first-party data. So, and that's going to be increasingly important when we think about AI, machine learning, large language models. So number one is the scope of data. It's bigger than we actually think it is today. Number two is sort of what you effectively need to do when you start to take ownership of your data. You start to think about, well, if I relied on other companies or other service providers or partners to do more with my first-party data, if I start taking that ownership myself, now I have to become responsible for those things, whether it's the safety and security of it, as Steve put it, or even how to sort of manage it better, how to properly be a good steward of my customers' data. And then third is the activation, right? After you have all this information, the reason, right, let's be clear, right? The data itself, we are all consumers on this call, and really everyone, even the owners of dealerships, the consumer really ultimately owns their data. This is really the foundation of privacy and compliance and so forth. So if we actually become stewards of that data for the shopper, now we have to do better with that holistic sort of view of that data. I have to use that to better engage the customer in the right channels, the right way, the right offer, because the last thing we want is to accumulate this data and not know how to use it, and then in turn not give the customer a great experience. So again, finding the scope of that data and aggregating it, kind of understanding how to secure it, manage it, et cetera, and then how to activate it. And those are kind of my thoughts in terms of what 2024 is really going to open up for dealers.
I'll actually say I think both of you guys are spot on. I mean, the security thing, I have special affection for that, and I think safeguard rules is big. It's confusing for a lot of dealers as well, right? I think that getting to what Atul said overall, I just sort of summarize it this way: is that the company that's able to make data easy to consume, use, and act on is the company that's going to really serve dealers well. Because a lot of dealers aren't going to be able to do that themselves. I mean, quite simply, I think what we're going to see is there's going to be a serious separation between those dealerships that are good at managing data and those who aren't. Now, I have sort of a narrow focus because I deal with Hispanic marketing data. But again, for where we are in market, we're coming at a marketing issue from a different perspective than most do it, because we're not just saying, hey guys, you can market in Spanish. We look at, analyzing the whole area in which a dealership operates and flavor the Spanish to the particular area. And that's using data in a way to make sure your communication with your potential customer is more beneficial and therefore more likely to produce an outcome. You multiply that times all the other ways in which we use data to make it really useful, then you're going to have fantastic outcomes for dealers in many different areas. I just think what's going to happen is as the complexity increases, those companies who are able to make it easy to use for dealers, and those dealers who act on that will be the ones that succeed.
Yeah, Adam, and I'll build off that, because I think your article that sort of was the catalyst to the conversation we're having here is, I think, a frontier of personalization of data that, in my mind, is not necessarily a new frontier, but is an extra opportunity to create that personalization. I think for decades, this industry has talked about diversity, equity, inclusion for all of the right and meaningful business case in terms of top line performance, bottom line performance, diversity of thought within an organization, et cetera, et cetera. But I will say, in the context of the conversation we're having right now, in the context of using data to drive personalization, the ability to understand someone's culture, someone's ethnicity, somebody's language preferences, and you combine that with the activation platforms, and you combine that with these emerging technologies like generative AI that allow you to also serve up images that speak to those things that resonate with something that's very personal. How someone speaks is very personal. What language that they gravitate towards naturally is very personal. These things culturally that sort of define who they are and who their family members were and who their grandparents were, et cetera, those things are very personal. I think that the ability for brands to tap into that sort of understanding of individuals is the next frontier when we're talking about data and activation and how do you serve those things up. It's really, really, I think, a cool opportunity in front of us.
Yeah, I think the personal piece is the thing to touch on there, because it's not just data language preference, it's also cultural value, right? So as we collect data, and if we're able to reflect for a salesperson understanding of what's valuable to that individual, right? Because that's always the great achievement when you're trying to do sales, is to connect with people. The more we can take that data and show what's important to that individual. So case in point, if you have someone who is a U.S. Hispanic of Mexican origin, well, the obvious thing is like Cinco de Mayo is an important thing, the 5th of May every year. If you compile all that together and you start to have a clear picture, or, we collect data in terms of Hispanic shopper data and what biases the shoppers might have when they come in based upon who they are, where they come from, et cetera. All that data, as you start to play together and as you start to apply AI to it, it starts to become pretty sexy in terms of how you can help a dealer best approach a particular sale, service, or just look at the customer in a long-term relationship point of view, which ordinarily those dealers who do look at them that way, doesn't matter who your customer is, those dealers tend to do really, really well because they're investing in a long-term relationship.
What we see with large dealer groups, especially, and when I shouldn't even qualify it as large, I'd say even rooftops that total 5 or 6 have started to increasingly hire roles that are involved in information, right? Whether it's an IT person that has evolved from managing the phones and the Windows installations to now actually expanding their career to cover customer data and first party data. But we also see sort of the CTO role that's more formal. And I'd say finally, we also see this sort of dual role of marketing and technology. And in fact, when we think about the word MarTech even, right, there's marketing and there's technology, and then there's the combination of both. And we see all three of these scenarios exist at dealers: technology as a pure play tech capability, marketing as a pure play marketing aspect, and then together how they actually work kind of side by side to better the customer experience. But increasingly, dealerships, we think, are going to hire around this role, or sort of shift roles of individuals they already have. That's the closest thing to being technical or being sort of apt to be curious about this. But yeah, we see increasingly a good trend towards this new appreciation for this aspect of the business.
I'd like to touch on something here. So the tendency, I think, is to look at all the positive aspects of data collection and data management. But I think it does help to look at some of the risks. And I think the safeguard rules, basically, Steve touched on that earlier. I think that's one area that right now it's starting out slowly, but I have a feeling that it's going to get more serious as time proceeds. Because cybersecurity, especially with the application of AI, is going to get a lot more aggressive and a lot more effective. And so as a consequence, many of these dealers, they're going to have to train their staff in ways that they previously haven't done. And so as a consequence, I think we're going to see in the coming years, we're going to see, really this year, we'll start seeing more lawsuits that'll be used as an example to show where a dealer didn't do what they were supposed to do to safeguard their customers' data. So I'd like to throw that on a table and see what Atul and Steve would think about that.
In terms of the backbone of some of this regulation, is sort of like, what's the intent? I think the intent is really what's being covered. I was the co-founder and kind of inventor of a company called Lead ID, which got renamed to Journaya. And that was all around lead qualification, lead verification, lead trust. And it all kind of stemmed from TCPA compliance and making sure that who I'm calling, I'm allowed to call. And if we kind of expand to all of marketing for a second here, and first party data and what you do with that data, I think if the intent is really customer experience and how we sort of even give control back to the consumer to choose what we know about them. When I say we, I mean the dealership, what the dealership knows about the user, how they can use that data. All of a sudden, there's value in knowing my caller ID. When I call a retailer and they know that I'm asking about an order that I just placed or a reservation I just made, we already see that kind of as a benefit for the consumer. So I don't want to actually opt out personally from certain things that offer me value. So I think the intent has to be what's important for dealers to understand. Is they're just blasting and sort of spraying and praying their marketing to everybody versus very highly segmented audiences with highly special offers for individuals. I think that's going to drive the next generation. It's almost going to help dealers do better with those regulations. And then, of course, inevitably, the fact that data is everywhere. I talked earlier about the scope of data and where it is created and how it's created. If it's made on behalf of the dealer with whatever vendor or tools or technology that's used, it's the dealerships to manage. And so that's another aspect of GLBA compliance, is making sure that all the places that the data that the consumer thought was in the hands of the dealers is safe, is being actioned upon properly. And again, when you tie all this together, I think actually regulation becomes a boon, an opportunity for dealers to take better control of it. And incidentally, the FTC may be just a great steward of customer experience after all.
however you talk about this topic, it's complex, right? I mean, you layer in what both of you are saying relative to the relationship between the dealers and the OEMs they represent, and the hundreds of ways an individual can start their consumer journey. I went to OEMbrand.com and built my car, and that data flows down to a local dealer. You know, those sorts of use cases. To even, I think, on the other end, you're starting to see a lot of dealers that have co-located spaces with insurance agencies, as an example, within their units, within their rooftops. That presents its own risks as well in terms of giving away that space and access to computer systems if you're a dealer and sort of subleasing that real estate. I think the other thing that exacerbates this today is this patchwork of regulation we have from state to state in the United States. I think that impacts some of the bigger, larger national groups less or more so than it does some of the smaller stores or groups that might have stores domiciled within one state. But certainly all of these are complexities when it comes to this sort of protection of consumer privacy. Consent is going to be a big deal, and I think it can get complex for a consumer. Am I consenting from a vehicle subscription in my vehicle? Who am I consenting this? Is it with the OEM? Is it with the service provider? To what am I consenting in my relationship with my dealership? There are a lot of different facets, but I agree with you, Atul. It's the intent, and I think most people are thinking about this in a way that is protecting the consumer, and in the best case, not being overly burdensome to the companies that have to comply with this sort of thing. I think if you look out into the future, when you think about things like vehicles being able to identify when they need service, right? Even today, your car tells you when it needs an oil change because the fuel life is up. That is going to grow in terms of connected vehicle technology and wear and tear and components, and being able to predictively offer up service reminders to pull into the dealership and get new tires, get new oil, et cetera, et cetera. Where this is going, I think, is the sky's the limit in terms of being able to capture that sort of data, but do so in a way that is protected and consistent with what individuals desire. I will say that we did a survey of about 1,500 auto consumers in the US last year, and when we asked them broadly, what are those things when it comes to brands trying to create personalization with you? What are those things that move the needle the most, or move the needle in terms of most negatively impacting your desire, your intent to do business with a brand? The number one thing that these folks said in terms of it would move the needle in the positive would be the ability to control one's communications with that brand. I think both of those are themes that you both touched upon in this conversation. So it's important to people, and the people that we have surveyed, the consumers we have surveyed, also tell us that the more a brand gives them the ability to control their own communications, the more likelihood those folks are going to do business with that brand.
Nobody here is a spring chicken, right? We've all been in the industry for a long time, and we've seen a lot of consolidation occur over the last 20 years, right? So how much does data personalization and the growth of AI and the mastery of that, of basically the tool sets that could be created here to really serve a dealer's ability to target a potential customer and talk to them in a way that makes them really want to buy from them? How much of this will contribute to, in your view, a continuing challenge for the small dealers to really get a leg up on big dealers who will have the capacity to master much of this? Thoughts?
I certainly see a dynamic between the long tail of this industry, but there's a balance. I feel like the large organizations, which, I spoke at a recent buy-sell conference, there's obviously a huge opportunity to use this as a toolkit to better consolidate dealers, right? I mean, if you have the capability, then you're kind of you have the ability to roll up more entities and make them more efficient. But at the same time, when we think about the underlying premise of CX and first-party data, a local dealer could actually do more with their data. They could actually be more ground floor, if you will, with that information. And we see this all the time. I mean, we work with everyone from large dealer groups and large organizations to individual rooftops, either directly or through our partner network. And we see that some of the smaller dealers are more open to dynamic like approaches to that data. It's like, wait, so you're actually telling me I could look at a one-by-one customer timeline and personalize how I speak to them, while the big guy's like, hey, how do I churn out a BDC to call thousands of leads? So I think the premise is very different, but the value that sort of first party data and what you do with it and where you collect it is still all the same. I think smaller dealers, though, have a smaller voice when it comes to like owning their data, but I think technology is going to help solve that for them.
One of the big drivers of this is going to be the democratization of this technology. Pick an innovation, right? First time Blu-ray came out, it cost you an arm and a leg. Now you can get a Blu-ray disc for 3 cents. It's going to be that same process that you see here. Early on, big dealer groups with the financial wherewithal to do these big systems implementations. But as we're already seeing, again, NADA here a couple of weeks ago was a clear showcase of there are a number of opportunities out there for dealers of any size to invest in the technology as well as the data solutions around this. So the more that you see capital investment flowing into this space, and there are millions upon millions of dollars flowing into this space, I think it's going to create a lot more opportunities for dealers of any size to tap into something, whether it's their own implemented solution or whether it's tapping into some sort of shared cloud environment. The solutions out there, the solutions are out there, and I think that is a benefit to everybody. I will also say, being in the audience at CES, where Mike Stanton was on stage talking about this along with some dealers and some others in this space, I think from a trade association point of view, based on some of the stuff that he signaled at CES, I do think that there is going to be a push on behalf of trade organizations to also support their members in this space as well. He signaled some of that stuff. I have not yet studied NADA to see if more news was released there, but my gut tells me that on behalf of dealers within the association, the NADA is also going to come and support this and help this in some regard.
So I think one of the interesting things is how the ecosystem plays along as a whole to improve things for the dealers. And I think that at NADA 2024, a theme that we certainly leaned in on was integration. We announced over 8 integrations. There's more to come. And really the premise is that no one system could really solve all that a dealership needs to figure out. And traditionally, the dealer was sort of the hub in a hub and spoke model. And so all of a sudden the dealer had to mediate between vendors and between tools that had their data and other sort of interactions with their customers and shoppers. But now, sort of there's other systems that could help the dealer do that. And so I think vendors starting to work with each other to make things easier for the dealer is increasingly becoming prevalent. At least that's what I saw at NADA 2024. It's what is going to help drive this better customer experience. Because again, like I said, no one system covers every channel, every method, every format. And yeah, that's an important part, I think.
Yeah, being able to connect the ecosystem, I think, is exceptionally important to this. I mean, there have been, massive investments in DMS systems, et cetera. Those systems are already implemented. They're running. Some of them are integrated. Some of them are not. You could have the same data sitting in multiple systems, right? And that creates churn and waste in itself. The ability to bring these systems together, not only through these integrations that you're describing, but also, do that in a way that all of these things, from your CRM to your DMS to your telephone system to your texting system, all that stuff has to work in harmony. I do think one of the things that is the risk piece of this, or has the risk in terms of where all of this stuff could fall down, is when an individual actually walks into the dealer showroom, right? That seamless interaction between what was done online versus the handshake, that first in-person meeting. That to me, I think, is an area where I think there's still a lot of opportunity. We touched upon it earlier in terms of various types of individuals, technology-wise, CTOs, CIOs, data scientists, et cetera, that a lot of these dealers are now hiring. I do think for the front end, the front of the line sales individual, there is opportunity as well as risk of all of that work, all of that investment, creating that experience digitally. There is still a risk, I think, of all of that could fall down and break when in the first 5 seconds of somebody walking into a dealer showroom. That's an area where I think is going to be interesting to watch on how that bridge continues to be built.
I've certainly had experience with dealers where they get a particular technology or a particular tooling. Well, actually, I'll just sum up with just a dealer the other day I was talking to who uses a fairly advanced CRM, and they think that they have everything right and they're convinced everything's correct. But then when I looked at how they were managing their responses to customers, they were completely without soul. You had this opportunity where a customer reached out and said, "Hey, I'm interested in this vehicle." And the response is, "Buy from my dealership. Here are the top 10 reasons why." The potential customer already made that decision by reaching out. So, and this is the perpetual problem with any company that does sales, and why there will always be consultants to be able to make money, is because a lot of people just miss that thing that makes a difference in every transaction, which is the human touch, which connects to that individual that makes them want to buy from you. And in some ways you can mimic a lot of that. Like with AI, you can mimic a ton of that stuff. But then to get to your point, Steve, then if they walk in the door, if it's not a pure digital retail experience, when they walk in that door, if the experience is not equal to what led them to walking in that door, then everything can fall flat on its face. So I had this image of the conversation I had a week or two ago with a customer, and it's like, boy, that was a big miss, but he didn't see it.
Steve, you mentioned that data scientists, as an example, are being considered and getting involved at a high level within automotive. What is your opinion, all three of you? I'd love to know, in terms of automotive as an industry, do you think that our industry can compete with the other obvious industries for the top tech talent?
Absolutely. I mean, I think yesterday there was an announcement that a certain electric vehicle manufacturer had hired a new vice president of marketing that came from one of the big four technology companies. It's a perfect example. I think when you're thinking about what we're talking about, and when you're thinking about the data and the technology that's the heart of it, and ultimately where all of that stuff gets published, whether it's on socials, whether through your connected TV, whether it's through shoppable ads, all of that requires, I think, a basis of technology know-how. Whether you're a scientist, whether you're an analyst, or whether you're in systems implementation, I think that there is a spot for those sorts of individuals and those sorts of talents in this industry. And quite frankly, I think it is a strategic imperative for this industry overall to make sure that we lure those type of individuals to this industry.
I've had experience outside of auto leading up to when Orbi was founded, and I keep pretty well up to speed on what's happening in other industries. Certainly, Steve has far more exposure to that. But when I hear that the sort of the comparisons of our industry to others, or hey, we see this happening elsewhere, I think increasingly this is the case with all industries. The grass is always greener on the other side. I'll give a simple example. We moved to a new HR system, and at Orbi, and this is a real world example. And recently in this transition, there was some collateral damage. Okay. And this collateral damage can only happen if some of the systems aren't as seamless as we'd like to think they are. And it turns out that our amazing payroll system, which I love a lot, our HRIS system, so a human resource information system, they are using a company that does API integrations to the big healthcare providers, the insurance providers. So what happened is, along the way, a consumer one of our employees lost their coverage. And it's because the API between our HRIS system and this vendor and the CSV, the PDF, the SFTP, the email operation that followed on didn't go through. And so whether it's healthcare or the hospitality industry, I'd like to argue that just being in the automotive industry and working on some of this, we're kind of at par. I feel the whole world is evolving equally the same. And I'd sort of tell everyone, when you're at a retailer, at a hotel, at any system, at any place where there's a screen that other person is looking at, peek over and look at that screen. It's going to be black and green. It's going to be old and clunky. It's going to look like Windows 95. And then you sort of sit back and wonder, but their website is amazing. And when I shop and return things and buy things and loyalty points and all that's seamless. So we think that all industries have legacy systems that we're all kind of building on top of. And I don't think we have to be shy to say that automotive is up there along with every other industry in its evolution and in its innovation.
Yeah, we had a, let's say it's an industry somewhat similar to auto, reach out to us, really large manufacturer rep, and talking to them in terms of what they have is laughable in comparison to what's in auto. So yeah, there is a tendency to look at your own stuff and say, oh, there are other, the grass is greener, blah, 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 exactly what Atul said. But I actually think auto a lot of times is leading as opposed to following. And I think the one thing I've learned, I've been in the industry since before 2000, is the one thing I've learned is that one thing people in auto will do is when they find something that works somewhere else, they'll adapt it very quickly to their needs. And that's something that's been demonstrated time and time again. So I wouldn't be terribly worried about auto being behind the curve at all. I think auto has the right combination of attitudes and people to adapt quickly and is probably ahead of the curve in many cases.
Basically, what we have sort of defined as our purpose in this industry is middleware for customer experience. And that middleware, that ability to connect different disparate pieces include both within this industry and this industry to the outside. So Adam, to your point, there's so much amazing tech and capabilities out there. And we see increasingly CTOs and IT people and marketing people at these automotive dealerships look at those outside solutions as options. And so we do see a need to create connectivity and sort of a glue between anything a dealer wants to use and their customer experience workflow. So yeah, we're huge proponents of both inside and outside tech helping the auto buying experience.
Can you speak a little bit about how identity and understanding identity through data helps you provide a better service?
Basically, our approach to the market is, again, we emphasize culture over language, but that requires knowledge, right? And it requires a view to a community that doesn't treat them as a monolith, because when you speak to someone that looks like me a lot of times, and if they haven't had much interaction with you as Hispanic community, their view of that community is rather monolithic, and they speak Spanish. But as a guy who lives in the Caribbean, married into Caribbean culture, which is a whole lot overlaps with Hispanic culture, you'll kill yourself if you say someone of Puerto Rican origin is the same as someone from Mexican origin. It's just, if you want to offend someone from a particular culture, make some stupid comment like that. So our approach is just, one of helping dealers gain the knowledge they need to communicate well with the community around them, and understanding, using data to understanding the various layers and levels to that community that's around them. That's a mixture of data and knowledge about culture that becomes really important. And in our particular case, the way we approach that is we have some software that we wrote that pulls together a lot of data from a lot of sources to help inform what we say to dealers. And then we put together some AI solutions for generating content, whether written or spoken, or layered on video, in a flavored style of Spanish, again, depending upon the type of group. So, if it's an area that's largely of Mexican heritage, then, we might flavor the language a little bit in that direction. It comes down to being human. I mean, using data to be more human. It's like I go over to somebody's house, or I'm trying to connect with somebody. I'm going to want to do it in a way that shows to them I respect who they are, right? It's kind of like, how do you approach people in life? And in some cases, some dealers just don't know. And so what we do is we help them get the knowledge to know, to understand what, approaching a community that you haven't marketed to is not rocket science. There's a lot of data that you can use to understand that community. And then after that, you just be damn human, right? And connect with people. I think anybody here on the call would say, the ultimate mastery of marketing is connection, right? And so for what we do is we work data into working with our customers so that they connect. I can't really think of any other way to put it. Maybe you two can give me a better a better twist.
Well, honestly, that's what I love about the conversation we're having here. And when I think about, Adam, what you're bringing to this conversation in terms of what I'll call the cultural insight, the cultural sensitivity, the business case of why to present a brand in your marketing in a way that resonates in that way, to what we do in terms of helping enrich that data, that first party data that brands may have, to be able to provide a little bit more insight in terms of who they are, to a tool in terms of being able to activate on that data. When I think about the general theme of what we're talking about here, it boils down to a metaphor that I use often in terms of fuel and engine, right? If you're bringing the blueprint of why, we bring the fuel in terms of the data, and a tool brings the engine in terms of the middleware and what our Orbi does. It's a really, I think, synergistic ecosystem of various brands working together to deliver on these very cultural, appropriate, and I want to use the appropriate where I'm going to ask for a little bit of grace. I think you touched upon it a minute ago, Adam, in terms of saying something perhaps culturally insensitive, no intent there, et cetera, et cetera. So, but this notion that says, as brands, very specific use cases, right? Every dollar matters, CPMs add up, pennies add up. If those ads hit the mark and resonate or not, all of that adds up. And if you're thinking about, the theme that we're talking about, and you're trying to sell an electric vehicle specifically, right? I will paraphrase here what I've heard from folks at S&P, for example, is that when you consider an African American audience versus an Asian American audience, they will say, and they've shared this in public audiences on stage, that Asian Americans tend to gravitate a little bit more towards electric vehicles than other ethnic groups, right? And so with that sort of insight, you have this opportunity to be very narrow, very targeted in terms of, hey, I got to sell more EVs. And that's a strategy around that. Again, I'm going to ask for grace in terms of, if there's folks listening, I maybe used, forgive me if I used a term that was insensitive, but there is an underlying strategy of the better you know people, the better your ability to serve up ads and experiences that are very personal, and the better the likelihood that they're going to buy your product or services. And when I think of what you're saying, when I think of what we play in the ecosystem, when I think of a tool, what you and others are doing in this ecosystem, it's really a terrific opportunity for dealers and ultimately for customers.
In terms of Orbi and sort of how we perceive our role in this industry is really connectivity, as I said earlier. We see dealerships starting to really think about their shoppers and customers' experiences. With that comes this first-party data aspect, and it's very difficult for dealers to juggle so many different vendors. And I'd say increasingly we see dealers also choose their partners around sort of that major criteria. It's like, hey, are you going to help me use my data? I don't need your data. I don't need your products. I need solutions around my first party data. And I see that with, increasingly the industry and different vendors offering that capability, us included. But that's kind of how we envision this industry evolving, is connectivity. And that's kind of our premise of middleware at Orbi.
But we all know that a lot of people think emotionally. And in fact, one would always argue, and I did a stint in politics. I used to be a political hack at one point in my life. The rule there, is to connect with people emotionally. Stats don't connect, emotions connect. And, when I wrote that article, I was looking back at it briefly to remind myself what I wrote. What I was getting at is, in the area of Hispanic marketing, there's a lot of emotion from dealers that prevents their ability to see the opportunity, right? And I think that's the other side of the data challenge. And what I was pointing out is, you can look at the data that says, for example, this particular community continues to grow rapidly. It's one of the fastest growing still in the United States, and will be for quite some time. Spending power is exploding, because if you look at the spending power over time, it just keeps as middle class grows. But yet there are a lot of dealers who just don't see the opportunity. And I think one of the challenges, and in this particular case, I'm just using an example where there's a very obvious blind spot for a fair number of dealers for different reasons, for not seeing the opportunity. What other areas might you guys see where dealers have opportunities with data that's out there and just don't see it? And what are the repercussions for that over time? For the Hispanic market, the repercussions I see is that those dealer groups and OEMs that really know how to market to the Hispanic community will do better and better over time, at the expense that those that don't, because it's really a difference between developing in a blue water environment versus a red water environment, where there's a lot of competition for the same people, as opposed to creating new opportunities within your particular footprint of operations for a dealership. Do you guys have any other areas where you think that, say, dealers' particular blinders way of seeing the world will limit their abilities to capitalize on the data that we might be able to provide over time?
I could give a quick thought. The pendulum always swings, and sort of we see that this push towards first party data is a strong bet. But once a dealership understands their data, they now need to work with partners to enrich it and glean more insights from it. Adam, sort of understand, hey, demographics, and should I be speaking to this sort of market differently? So enrichment is a big area of our integration work, whether it's the big credit bureaus or big data companies who have privacy safe, compliant ways to understand shopping behavior, demographics, and whatnot. And being able to pull that in is going to be an important thing. So we talk third party, now we're talking first party, but inevitably we're going to need to help dealers enrich their first party data with third party data. So follow that train of thought there. I think that it requires a balanced view. It's still involving a holistic view of all possible data sets, but it's sort of like I lean in first on first party data and then integrate all these other partners. So definitely dealerships shouldn't forget that they're going to need to tap into enrichment capabilities to make their data cleaner, more powerful, more insightful, and more actionable.
Spend all the money you want on a big engine. You run bad fuel through it, it's not going to deliver the performance you want. Spend all the money you want on a premium fuel, you run it through a bad engine, still not going to get the performance you want. That's what it boils down to. And ultimately with that, I think if you are able to combine both of those things together, you gain a competitive advantage. And the, Adam, to your question, it's the, what happens if I do nothing? What happens if I do a little? What happens if I go all in on this? And I think it is creating a competitive advantage versus the dealership across the street. And I think your ability to tap into these technologies, to this data, creates that competitive advantage, for again, you versus the individual across the street. And I think ultimately it boils down to that. Facebook years ago proved it, right? Pictures matter, images matter, right? People gravitate towards images perhaps a lot more easily than they do copy, be it 140 characters, be it less or more. Pictures, images seem to resonate more with consumers. Now you layer in things like shoppable ads. You layer in things like QR codes and the ability to not only jump somebody to a very unique experience, curated experience through a QR code, but also the ability to capture first-party data, IP address, et cetera, from somebody just scanning that code. Again, it feeds that data profile, that golden record, that 360-degree view of the person. Now, this ability for various generative AI technologies to take that, run that data through a CDP, run that data through middleware like Orby talked about, and almost instantaneously serve up an ad. Let's continue with the use cases we've talked about here, an ad not only in Spanish, but then is representative of an image that speaks to Spanish or Hispanic culture. I think getting back to that competitive advantage piece, a dealer that's able to do that in pick a city, right? Santa Fe, Albuquerque, Denver, who knows, right? The ability of a brand to do that versus its competition, I think creates an advantage and a more likelihood that that individual is going to show up at your dealership and say, I'm interested in what you have on the lot, or I'm interested in your service. And I think generative AI allows to do that, do it quickly, do it in real time. Allows, particularly if an OEM, to give more, to provide more value in terms of handing off leads to its dealer network in that regard as well. I think there's a lot of opportunity in tapping into AI. We recently did a survey of 200 business leaders in the US and the UK. We complemented that with a survey of about 2,000 consumers in both markets. And of the business leader, 83% of them said, yeah, they're using data and predictive analytics to as a key competitive advantage. Some other stats here, how AI is being used, sentiment analysis. 41% of those respondents are aware of it, but only 12% of them are implementing it. Predictive analytics, speech recognition technologies. A lot of folks are aware of this stuff, but very few of the folks that we surveyed, the business leaders that we surveyed, are actually implementing this. So they understand, I think, the business strategy, the business imperative, the benefit that comes from it. I do think the topic's still a little bit of a wild, wild west. Some folks are implementing it, again, based on the survey that we did of business leaders in the US and the UK. So there is opportunity there, and I think it's just going to grow. And I go back to Adam's core article that brought us to this conversation, right? The ability to go beyond personalization and look at it through the lens of culture and language is just a next frontier in companies' efforts to personalize their marketing.
I look at AI with a little bit more of a jaundiced eye, in the sense that I think right now we're at a cusp point. We have AI that's coming on the market, and some of which is quite good, some of which is quite questionable, and there's a whole lot in between. And anybody who's going to be engaging an AI solution, I think, has to look at it as, if it's bringing them something. For example, what we do is we have a solution we're bringing to market right now. We're talking to one company that, without going into details, it's not even in the automotive space, that does a ton of work in one particular space, and they see a huge opportunity for our AI solution, both in English and Spanish, to help them generate content, whether it's any type of social media content you could shake a stick at. The way we do our work is we really discipline our AI, so to speak. We don't allow the AI to be able to do what it wants, because from our point of view, that you produce crap. But what we've told this organization is, we've said, look, if you think of it as, if we do this work for you, you're hiring somebody. And in no circumstance, if you hired, a new writer or what have you, would you allow that individual just to do what they do? And what you'd want to do is review their work. You want to, check it out until they prove that they can operate on their own. And I would say any AI solution that you engage right now, you definitely want to approach in a way that's just very responsible in validating that they really are doing what they said they could do. And if they didn't, do they have mechanisms in place to ensure that the AI learns to be able to do what they said it could do, right? Because it's a learning model. And you have to be able to feed that learning model data over time to get better at what it's supposed to do. So, as I think I'm older than you, Steve, I don't know how long you've been in the auto space, but I've seen a lot of things come and go over the years. Like, when video first appeared, it was like, oh my God, video. It's like, guys, really? Yeah, AI's here. It's going to be great. It's going to take a lot of burdens off people's shoulders, but it's also going to create burdens if it's not managed well, right? So I look at it from both sides. And as someone that, is with a company that provides an AI solution, that's kind of a dumb thing from a marketing point of view, because I'm saying, oh yeah, buy our stuff, but be careful. We don't approach the market we never approach our customers in a way that's not completely honest, where we say, look, if we're working with you, here's what we see that's good. Here's what we see we're going to have to learn with, and let's work together. The result of that is typically we create relationships that last. But there is some hype out there. I guess that's my one thing coming out of this is beware of the hype too.
Yeah, I mean, the downside of this is if you do it wrong, particularly harnessing AI, there's a risk in breaking consumer trust, right? Serving up ads that don't resonate at all, wasted money. In the worst cases, serving up ads that might offend. Right, we've seen horror stories and heard horror stories about that time and time again. I won't belabor many of those, but taking certain data signals and making interpretations as such, and serving up ads that offend. I can think of 2 or 3 handfuls of examples of that already. So it is liken it to a toddler, right? You want to let them learn. You want to the power of the creativity, but you can't let them go unmanaged until they grow up a little bit.
Yeah, a little supervision goes a long ways. Actually, you made me think about. You're familiar with the concept of uncanny valley, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. And so, if anybody who's listening is not familiar with it, it's a concept that was generated quite a while ago, and it gets to the question of how do you sort of distinguish between AI and I, right? How do you tell the difference in what happens when it's not quite right? And what Uncanny Valley gets to is very clear to demonstrate when it comes to images, because look it up on Google. You can look up Uncanny Valley images, comparing different images, and you look at the images, and it's when you feel that discomfort where it's just not right. You never want to put a potential customer in that position. You never want to put somebody that you're marketing to in that position, whether they're feeling uncomfortable, so that it's that emotional state that they walk away from with that ad will not help you in any way. Or to get to the worst case, it actually generates an image that is repulsive in some way. So there is very much a good side here. Like, you have the potential of being able to produce a lot of content in volume in ways you've never been able to do it before. But hey, guess what? You just have to be smart about how you do it,
Yeah, it's crawl, walk, run. I wouldn't sprint on this one, right? It's crawl, walk, run, and good stuff. But there's equally as much opportunity for risk in these early days, and I think that's exacerbated a little bit by, I think people have a tendency in this early days not to trust AI, right? And so there's also this sort of inherent backlash of, well, this is AI generated, that I have to believe that there are a certain set of consumers that discredit ads or just, push ads off to the side, and simply, if not but for anything else, because they discover or understand it was generated by AI. There is a piece of risk to that as well, simply because there's still a sense of uncomfort with many folks around AI generated images.
Well, I think because at one level there's a sense that a feeling of manipulation, right?
Mhm.
is that you're trying to get me to think this is human. But hey, guess what, everybody? Sorry to break the news to anybody out here who actually listens to this video. Marketing is manipulation. Sorry to break the news to you. What you're trying to do is get people in an emotional mindset where they listen to you, right? And they act on that in a way that's beneficial to you when you're marketing something. That's not inherently dishonest. It's inherently dishonest when you're saying dishonest things. And I think the same can be applied to AI. If you're presenting what is an honest presentation, it's just a different form of marketing art, so to speak. Sort of, I think of Andy Warhol with what was the soup can or whatever. It's a different form of marketing now. It's not inherently dishonest. It is just a new creative way. And I think people will adapt to that as time goes on. I don't think it's going to be an issue as things proceed. It will be a problem when it's used in ways that is just plain wrong. Like, for example, doing a voice overlay, and I use, say, Clint Eastwood's voice on an overlay because I've recreated it, using captures of his voice. No, I don't think that'll go too well. I mean, I think for people who would hear something like that, they would listen and they would think at first, wow, that's Clint Eastwood. And then if they realized they wouldn't, they knew it wasn't Clint Eastwood, then they would decide, well, this is a dishonest organization. I don't want to buy from them. So there will be pitfalls. I mean, every new technology has pitfalls, that's for sure. But there'll also be a lot of benefits.
Dealers are at a bit of an inflection point, and it's not new. It's been an inflection point that is really catalyzed in response to the pandemic in 2020. And concurrent to that, these wonderful advancements in data and technology. At the end of the day, that in-person experience, study after study after study, hours included, that we did at Axiom of these 1,500 consumers, said the most personalized moment in their customer journey was that in-person interaction with the salesperson at the dealership. The opportunity for dealers now is to elicit emotion and connectivity in the digital moments that they have leading up to that. And so there's a lot of opportunity. I think there are a lot of unknowns when we talk about things like AI and where this is going. But at the end of the day, there is a strategic imperative to this. It matters to the bottom line. And I think ultimately, customers want these sorts of personalized experiences. And so the conversation, I think, for dealers has moved past if. I think the conversation is now how and where do I start? The good news is that I think dealers more and more are getting a lot of opportunities to assess both data providers, whether it's Axiom, whether it's somebody else, technology providers, whether it's Orbe, somebody else, consultants such as yourself, Adam. I think there was plenty of opportunity for dealers to raise their head up and look around and ask questions and ultimately assess and make decisions around the solutions that are right for them.